Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video I'm going to finally go through how much exactly I spent in Thailand. I was there for 2.5 months earlier this year, working a full-time job completely remotely and traveling around Thailand too. Hopefully this can give you a good indication of how much you will be spending if you're planning a trip to Thailand anytime soon. So before I reveal just how much I spent in the 2.5 months that I was there, I just want to caveat my costs with a couple of things. First of all, I was not a typical backpacker because I was working a full-time role completely remotely, so I couldn't just stay in hostels all of the time. I mainly had to stay in hotels and guest houses, and because I did have to work full-time, I was constrained by the working hours of the day, which meant that again I couldn't spend my time how I pleased every single day. Monday to Friday I was working full-time. Unlike a backpacker who has all their time to themselves, I wasn't able to go out and do as many activities as I wanted, or I couldn't explore maybe as many areas as other people do in the same amount of time. So that is just something to bear in mind. I also want to add that I'm not necessarily like other digital nomads either, in the sense that firstly, I did not base myself in just one city or two cities in Thailand for the whole duration that I was there. Instead, I actively chose, despite having a full-time job, to actually travel around the country. So I was moving destinations every 3 or 4 days, which was a choice that I personally made. It did make it more exhausting, but it did mean that I got to see more of the country, which is what I wanted to do. But most digital nomads going to Thailand would likely base themselves just in 1 or 2 cities for a month or so at a time, whereas that just wasn't the case for me. So this is kind of more a combination of backpacking but working remotely, but my job isn't as fully flexible as if I were a freelancer or I worked online, like doing YouTube full time or being a content creator full time, for example. I still was constrained by working hours. I had meetings, etc. in different time zones, so those were things to factor in. I just wanted to say this at the beginning because my budget and how much I spent isn't going to be necessarily the same as either a typical backpacker or a standard digital nomad who just stays in one place the whole time. So I guess you're all wondering how much I actually spent in Thailand for the full 2.5 months, and I can say that the grand total was £2,873.01. I don't know why there's a 1 pence there, but apparently there is. I should say that at the time that I travelled, I was in Thailand December last year and then January and the first half of February of this year. And at the time that I went, £1 was about 43 or 44 Thai baht. Just as an indication, obviously currency exchanges fluctuate and change. So how does my grand total of £2,873.01 break down? I have broken this down into several different categories. The first being the flights to and from Bangkok. I actually found very good flight deals, which is partly why I decided to go to Thailand last year when I decided to go on a spontaneous adventure. And I personally think I'm also pretty good at finding cheap flight deals. So if you want me to do a video in the future giving all my tips and tricks for finding cheap flights, then let me know in the comment section below. I was in Lisbon at the time, but I found a really cheap flight from Madrid to Bangkok for 166 euros and 2 cents. And that was roughly £147. So I found a one-way flight from Madrid to Bangkok, £147, which is an insane deal. And then the flight from Lisbon to Madrid was €23.19, which is like £20.52. And then I didn't know where I was going to end up after Thailand because I only bought a one-way ticket. But whilst I was on the road, I then decided to go to Sri Lanka afterwards, and I found a cheap flight from Bangkok to Colombo for £63.50. Again, I found that flight by doing some of my tricks. So the total for my flights to and from Bangkok were only £231.02, which is pretty good in my opinion. It was probably, I think, one of the smallest, it is the smallest category of costs. I spent a total of £261.99 for all of the miscellaneous costs to even get to Thailand. So that includes £27.25 Uber to the airport, which unfortunately, because I left I think at 4 AM or 7 AM, the Uber prices were just ridiculously expensive. It's not usually that expensive. £51 PCR test at Madrid airport, £15.15 at food at Madrid airport, because I was in Madrid airport for 24 hours. You can see that in the vlog. £5.81 for travel insurance for a couple of days where my Thailand travel insurance didn't cover me. £53.47 for the Tune Thai travel insurance that you had to buy before you went to Thailand, because when I went they still had some COVID restrictions and they had the test and go program, so you had to buy this specific Thai travel insurance. So that was £53.47 for 2 months. I paid £9.31 for my onward flight ticket, because when you arrive in Thailand they need to see proof of an onward journey, so I used a website where you can buy like a fake flight, so that cost me only £9.31. And then I paid roughly £100 for the 1 night test and go, so that came to the total of £261.99. Once I was in Thailand and my spending in Thailand, my biggest expense was actually accommodation. I don't know why I said that in such a surprised tone. I guess it makes sense that accommodation cost me the most. My accommodation was £998.10, and this was for 63 nights of accommodation, so that averages out at £15.84 per night. The accommodation I stayed in over the 63 days were a combination of hotels, Airbnb flats, hostels, and kind of bungalow guest houses, I want to say. So I did stay in a few hostels, but it was very minimal, and it was only on the weekends or at times where I knew that I could stay in a hostel and I didn't need to have my own quiet space to work in. I did mainly stay in hotels. And another thing to mention is that I did travel over the Christmas and New Year season, where things are slightly more expensive, and also on top of that I did spend a lot of time in the south of Thailand on the islands. I did spend approximately, I want to say, a month in total in the south, 2 weeks in Phuket and about 2 weeks in Koh Samui, and both of them are, especially Koh Samui, quite expensive islands, especially if you're staying in private accommodation and not staying in hostels. So that really did bump up the price for me during this time, and it was over the Christmas period, so not the best time to go to those islands because it is more expensive, but that is why things got a bit more expensive for me. And on top of that, I also broke my toe in Thailand. It's in the vlogs, and so that meant that I had booked to stay in a hostel for a few nights when I was in Koh Samui, I think, but I couldn't actually stay there because I stayed there 1 night. It was a private room in the hostel, but I realised with my broken toe I just could not hack the stairs, the noise, I just felt so uncomfortable being there when I was injured and I could barely move. So I actually ended up moving to an Airbnb, which A, was more expensive, and B, I'd already paid for my hostel and I couldn't really get a refund, so I did lose out money there. And then my next biggest cost, almost surprisingly, is my transport. The total cost for transport is £433.82, and that covers £173.54 domestic flights, £232.42 spent on taxis and grabs, £13.91 on public transport, so that includes like ferries, the occasional bus or metro that I took in Bangkok, and then £13.95 for a bicycle rental for 2 weeks. Taxi and grab amount kind of surprises me, but then it also doesn't, because as I said, I was working full time, which meant that I had a lot less time to move around, and because I chose to move around the islands and I chose to move around Thailand as a whole, it meant that I had no time. And if you have no time, you have to be willing to pay extra for faster modes of transport. So that meant I was paying more on taxis because I had to get somewhere quicker. That meant, for example, I couldn't take overnight buses or really long overland buses, really long ferry journeys or anything like that, because I had to be at a desk in silence with good Wi-Fi for the workday. So I spent a lot on taxis, and as a solo traveller as well, you don't really split the cost with anyone. So especially on the islands, I remember spending a lot of money solo on taxis. I can't drive, so I couldn't rent a motorbike. I also wouldn't have been comfortable myself with renting a motorbike and driving it around myself anyway, even if I could drive. So that was completely out of the question. Yeah, I know that other people save a lot of money by renting a moped or a motorbike and exploring Thailand that way, and it does cut down on a lot of costs, but sadly I just couldn't do that. And then my next biggest expense was food. So I spent a total of £421.79 on food for the whole time that I was there, and that averages out daily at £6.70 for my meals. I would say this is pretty reasonable. I did eat very locally, I did eat very cheaply. If you're eating at street stalls, then you'll be able to find meals for between 50 and 60 baht generally, and that's less than £1.50. I would say that meals on average were a lot more expensive in the south, in the islands, which is again to be expected as it's a lot more touristy. I would say that you wouldn't be able to find a meal less than 80 baht minimum when you're on the islands, so again that does bump up the price. I had a lot of fruit tea and coffee and milk tea when I was out there, and you can get milk tea and bubble tea and things like that for as little as 30 to 40 baht, which is again about £1. But I would say, so almost surprisingly, if you're getting coffee and you're getting some kind of specialty coffee or going to any of the trendy cafes, and there's a lot of them, especially in the north of Thailand, in Chiang Mai and also in Bangkok, but those coffees can be quite bougie and quite expensive, and I would say on average they're probably around 70 to 80 baht, which is sometimes even more than a full-on meal. But sometimes it's really nice to go, it's really cool to try the different flavours, the cafes are pretty cool and they're nice to work in as well, so I would splash out a bit on those. But I did have many a coffee, and I would say that I spent on average about £1.50 to £2 on a coffee, so that also came under that food budget. But as an average food budget for £6.70 a day, I think I did pretty well, because I ate locally, I also ate out at a few Western restaurants, I treated myself to, as I say, bubble tea and other kind of snacks and desserts. In this food total as well includes small supermarket runs where I'd get snacks, and this is where I'd say 7-Eleven is my best friend, because 7-Eleven would have really cheap snacks you could pick up just to have for breakfast. They'd also sell really cheap drinks and coffee as well if you wanted something but you didn't want to spend 70 baht on it. Next up is activities. I spent a total of £300 and 70 pence on activities for the whole 63 days. This is probably going to be less than most other backpackers, but again, as I said, I mainly only had time to do activities either on the weekends or in the mornings before I started the workday, because I started the workday at 3 p.m. local time. I did do a lot less sightseeing than most backpackers, I'm assuming, because they had so much more time than I did. But this included the entrance fees to temples or any other attraction or museum that I visited, a boat tour I took in Bangkok, a day trip to the Similin Islands from Phuket, which cost £58.14, a day trip to Raya and Coral Island, which cost £34.88, a cooking class which cost £45 in Koh Samui, and then in Chiang Mai I did a Doi Inthanon day trip that cost £37.67, and I also did a day trip to Chiang Rai which cost £46.05. So I did various activities. I didn't do as much as I maybe wanted to do, but I did more than enough to satisfy the time that I had. And then finally I have my miscellaneous costs. The total comes to £225.59. This included a TR60 tourist visa, which was £53.47, and I got that before I entered Thailand. £20.47 on a SIM card, plus all the phone top-ups that I had after that for the whole 2.5 months. £44.19 on a visa extension, a 30-day visa extension. £51.88 on laundry, medication, photocopying, and then also I think it's this expensive because I included my MacBook charger that I had to go and buy, which was probably the majority of that £51.88, and then £56.13 on shopping. This includes souvenirs. I did quite a bit of clothes shopping at markets, things like that. Finally, which is actually not included in the grand total of my miscellaneous or the grand total of my Thailand spending, is I did have to pay £232.30 in hospital fees because I went to the hospital twice for my broken toe, plus I had to pay for all the medication, so that cost that much. But luckily I had the travel insurance, so don't forget the travel insurance, and it covered it all for me. But that is an extra expense that I did have to pay for upfront, and I got reimbursed by the travel insurance company later on. So yeah, that is my grand total for just under 2.5 months in Thailand. My last 9 days in Thailand, I was actually in a temple doing a silent meditation retreat. So I didn't include any costs there because I made my own donation to the temple for the time that I spent at the temple. And when I was at the temple, everything was provided for me. I didn't have to pay anything more than a 300 baht registration fee, and then while I was in the temple, I think there was something like a 20 baht fee for taking part in one of their ceremonies. So because I had my own expenses with my donation, so they're not included in this total. The total of £2,873.01 is, I would say, roughly for the 63 63 or 64 days that I had in total. I did actually think that I would spend more than this on a day-to-day because I was obviously still working full-time remotely. Quite happy with that. If you round up that expense per month, my monthly expense was £978.60. And that is not just a typical living in Thailand and working remotely. It's living in Thailand, working remotely, and traveling around the country at the same time. So I'm quite pleased with the amount that I spent. If you are planning a trip to Thailand, I think if you are on a shoestring budget and you are going to be a proper backpacker, staying in hostels, doing a few activities here and there, mainly eating at food stalls, not splashing out really on anything, I do think you could probably get by on around £500 a month budget. I think it's definitely absolutely doable. That is basically double what I've just said if you're on a shoestring budget. But if you want to do a few more activities, if you want to splash out a little bit, maybe have enough money to go shopping, etc., I would recommend budgeting between £800 to £1,000. I think you can definitely get by on £800. It's £300 more than your shoestring budget, and it means you get to do a few more activities and you can eat in a few more fancier restaurants or get something a bit more expensive if you wanted to. And on the upper end of that, £1,000 just gives you even more money to do those things. My most expensive cost was my accommodation. If you're staying in hostels, that can really cut the cost down, and I still spent on average less than £1,000 a month. And then finally, I would say if you're more on the flash packer end of the spectrum and you prefer maybe having a private room in a hostel or having a private room in a hotel, you want to maybe eat out at a few Western restaurants where it's a bit more expensive, you might want to do a lot more of the more expensive activities, then I would probably recommend budgeting between £1,300 and £1,500 to do that. And then finally, the last section of the video, I just want to touch upon a few tips that I have for saving money whilst you're in Thailand. The first tip I have is to eat at street stalls. It might not look like it's the most convenient, there might not even be proper seats and tables, but it is really cheap, the food is really great, and you're just going to save yourself a lot of money. My second tip is to download the app Grab or Bolt. They are both two taxi ride apps and they are very cheap. I would recommend downloading them, and if you're a solo traveller, use Grab Bike. Grab Bike was my absolute saviour. I loved it so much. It was significantly cheaper than a car where you're paying for 4 places. You're only paying for one person on a Grab Bike. You're getting on the back of a motorbike, and it was just so cheap to get around. My journeys were heavily reduced when I use Grab Bike as a solo traveller, so I'd definitely recommend that. And second of all, if you're having to take a taxi ride, maybe try and split the fare with other travellers that you make friends with and meet in hostels or on activities, so that it does split the cost a little bit. Another tip I have is that if you're staying in hostels, try and find a hostel which is around £5 a night but includes breakfast with your accommodation. Even though it might not be the best breakfast, it's still free food, and if you are on a shoestring budget, then you're not going to say no to free food, and it's going to save you a few extra pounds, which really do go a long way when you're in Thailand. Another tip is if you are short on cash or you just need a few snacks to get by and you're not really looking to have a full-on meal, I would honestly recommend just going to 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven not only is a guaranteed place where they accept card, but it's also a place that sells really cheap snacks. And there was many a time where I wasn't really hugely hungry, but I still wanted something to eat, so I'd just pop round to 7-Eleven and get like a £1 meal. And then one final tip I have is, again, one that also helps with if you're short on cash, but if you download the food delivery apps, I would recommend GrabFood and Food Panda. They usually have a lot of discounts on restaurants and things like that, so even if you are ordering beforehand to go pick it up at the restaurant, you might get a discount that isn't advertised at the restaurant but is available on the app for the exact same meal. Or if you are at home or you are working remotely as a digital nomad, for example, you could order their buy one get one free meals, again saving a lot of money, and it's really handy to just have that extra meal spare for whenever you do need it. And again, if you are short on cash, this is just an easy way where you can just pay by card and you don't have to worry about going to an ATM and calculating how you can minimise your ATM withdrawal fees and your exchange rates. Those are just a few hacks. I have done another video on 10 things I wish I knew before I went to Thailand, so I'd recommend watching that before you go. That is it for this video. I hope that this breakdown has been useful and interesting for those of you who might be planning a trip to Thailand soon. If you have any more video requests or questions about Thailand or anything else, my lifestyle, etc., then leave them in the comment section below and I will try my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!